Hey, what's going on, everybody? Sakura Kingdom here, aka Cody, aka KCodyHunt, aka Dude. Why do you have so many nicknames? What are you talking about? I thought you were a One Piece channel. Well, if there's two other things that I spend a lot of time fixating on, they are Pokemon and spreadsheets. And earlier today, I saw a really nice video about the tier list of the current Yu-Gi-Oh! Metagame by the numbers, made by Hakuna My Data, a channel I've been watching for a while. Please go check him out if you're into statistics and or Yu-Gi-Oh! He does really great work. And he inspired me to use his approach to analyze the current Pokemon metagame. Now, I've been looking at the meta of Pokemon on some sheets for a few weeks now, mainly analyzing matchup percentages and how that would factor into one's expected win rate at, say, a regional, and going based off of that. But I haven't been looking as much at, a general tier list independent of what you would expect to find at a given tournament, more so where these decks stand against each other in a vacuum in a particular week. I know that there's still, going to be some difference week to week depending on what's popular and what's working, but there is a slight difference in the concepts that I think separates a tier list from an expected win rate. So here at the bottom, I've got a bunch of images for, I want to say, 2022 of the current decks in the Brilliant Stars format. We're going Tier 1, Tier 1.5, Tier 2, Tier 3, and Rogue. I used the formula you'll see right here in addition to data from trainerhill.com based on the past week's results from online tournaments. And as far as tier definitions go, Tier 1 is anything over the 80th percentile, Tier 2 is anything from the 50th to the 80th percentile, Tier 3 is anything from the 10th to the 50th percentile, and then Rogue is anything under the 10th percentile that was still popular enough to make it into this video. I do have a Tier 1.5 listed here. That is mainly for any Tier 1 decks that seem to have a much lower score than the Tier 1, usually half or less than the other Tier 1 decks. I have also included deck lists for every archetype we go over in this video. By using the data on trainerhill.com, I have looked at the most played counts of the most often played cards in all of the deck lists that have achieved the highest finish for that archetype. So for example, ARCEUS INTELEON, it won multiple tournaments, so I took all of the winning lists and used the info based on what cards appeared most often at what counts to make that list. TOGEKISS, on the other hand, only had a single top 8, so since there was only one highest achieving list, that's the list we put into this video here. Now, these example lists are not necessarily going to be the exact 60 I would take to a tournament, what I advertise as the optimal build of the deck. This is more so a beginning point if you are new to an archetype and want to test it, and a snapshot of what is being played in these decks most often when they are at their best in that period of time. To give you an idea of what you're most likely going to see if you were to face this deck. So, getting right into it, I know that Mew Genesect has been the deck to beat lately, but this week, we're actually going to put ARCEUS INTELEON at the top spot. It's so versatile. You can attack with it, you can defend with it, you can keep healing with Sharon's Care, you can just boss snipe any little thing that gets in your way. You have such crazy specific search and draw power, and there's so many ways to tailor this deck to whatever you expect to play. Since there's so much search with the Drizziles, with the Inteleon line, you can fit all these crazy one-of supporters. You can go full shady dealings with your Inteleons, or you can even work on some quick shootings in order to round out your damage. And that versatility has really helped it out. Of course, Mew VMAX will still be Tier 1. It is still one of the best decks ever made. Crazy consistent, super high damage cap, very high skill ceiling. But, people have found more answers to it lately, and it's just sort of been falling off. Still amazing, but Arceus Inteleon has just managed to come up from underneath it. Now, getting into Tier 1.5, we have Malamar, Inteleon. We love Rapid Strike around here. Again, this deck has a lot of different options as far as high damage output. If you can sequence your turns right, you can get 320, 360, sometimes even 400 damage if you were to ever need it. Say you ran into a Turnus with a big charm, though we're not sure how often that's going to happen. But if it were to, you could. Malamar Inteleon is one of those decks that has a crazy, crazy high damage cap. And even though it can very easily be beaten if they're not attacking Manaphy, it still takes some scalps, and it's still going to be on Tier 1.5 for me. Up next, we have Jolteon Inteleon. It's been doing great this entire format. At first, people thought it wasn't going to do so well with Brilliant Stars coming out, but all this healing, all this search, all this sniping on all of the different Inteleon decks that are running rampant in the format still give it that great spot. And has a really good Arceus Inteleon matchup too. So that's going to keep it in Tier 1.5, especially when you have a good matchup against the best deck in the format. Now, speaking of good matchups against the better decks in the format, we have Dark Inteleon Arceus. Very similar to the Arceus Inteleon list that's at the top of the heap right now, but with a nice Dark package if you're trying to specifically beat Mew VMAX a little easier than you already do. It gives you a more varied offense at the sacrifice of some of those recovery plays. Once again, great deck. Now let's head on into Tier 2. These are the decks that had anywhere from 50th to 80th percentile in my findings. Right here, we have ARCEUS Duraludon at the top of Tier 2. Duraludon's ability Skyscraper makes it so that any Pokemon with special energy cannot damage it. It has so much HP, it is ridiculous to try and bring down, especially if they manage to run Hyper Potions in order to heal all the damage that you do. It can be a very, very frustrating deck to play against. That being said, however, a lot of decks have been able to tech against this, running less or no special energy if they're able to, and after you play against enough, it is possible to get a good game plan against it, especially if you have fighting type attackers to keep on knocking out their Arceus. Then we have Gengar. One interesting thing of note is that Trainer Hill did not differentiate between the Gengar Houndoom and the Gengar Arceus variants. The highest performing Gengar list that I found from this past week was a Gengar Arceus variant. I'm personally a bigger fan of that one myself, just because it seems to have a better matchup spread. Yes, the fighting weakness is there, but you have so much offensive power, so much consistency, so much acceleration with the Arceus that you're usually able to pick up the tempo and get through the game before they can do too much to you. The Gengar Houndoom one does have an amazing Mew matchup, that's why you play it, but it does struggle with a lot of these other decks, and when Mew VMAX is sort of starting to fall off in popularity, that struggle just gets a little bit higher for the pure Gengar version. Next we have, oh, not that one, WHIMSICOTT, actually. At first, I didn't realize that this week it's been a pure WHIMSICOTT deck that's been doing well in these online tournaments. Lots of energy disruption, 4 Crushing Hammer, 4 Fan of Waves. This thing is going to make your opponent have a very, very bad time. I've not played it yet. I've only played against it. And every time I have, I want to pull my hair out. So I can definitely see why it is at least on Tier 2. But there could be either a popularity issue or the fact that it's still a relatively new deck and there is more tweaking to do to make it better as the meta evolves. But either way, it is still a solid choice. After that, we have, where did you go? Rapid Strike URSHIFU with MOLTRES. Robin Schultz brought Rapid Strike URSHIFU back to the forefront at Liverpool Regionals. People had written it off because of its psychic weakness, but it turns out that being able to hit Arceus for a weakness, sometimes one-shotting it with a big charm if you have a choice belt attached, and then also one-shotting Mew VMAX can make for a pretty good deck. That being said, it is a bit harder to play. Robin Schulz is an absolute genius when it comes to Pokemon, so not everyone is going to be able to play it to the exact same degree that he did. Next we have another Urshifu variant, the Rapid Strike Urshifu INTELEON. No dark type attackers in this one, just a very straightforward, very streamlined Urshifu list, trying to G-Max Rapid Flow or Gale Thrust as much as possible, get those Medicham Yoga loops in order to take a second turn, potentially even one-shot some bench sitters with a combination of Passimian, Telescopic Lens, and Quick Shooting INTELEON. If you like a spread deck, this is one of your best picks. And finally, one of my favorite decks, we have SUICUNE LUDICOLO at the bottom of Tier 2. You're probably thinking, Cody, why is SUICUNE LUDICOLO not higher? It has an insane damage cap. It gives you so much specificity with what you are able to search. Near the end of the game, you have these 13 card hands that give you the answer to pretty much anything your opponent's going to try and stick you with. Why is it at the bottom of Tier 2? And that's the same question I asked myself. I'm a big fan of this deck. I think it is insanely well positioned, but I think that it's an issue of popularity. People are teching against it more so. More lists are running Collapsed Stadium, and more lists are running Avery, which lets the player draw 3 cards and then limit their opponent's bench size to, or make their opponent discard until they have only 3 Pokemon on their bench. If you hit them at a time when they have to discard a couple Lotads or their INTELEONs or whatever, it's going to make it harder for the SUICUNE player to pick up on the back foot. And there's also just a pretty high skill floor and skill ceiling with this deck. So if there are newer players playing with it, they might not be able to play it at the same level as a lot of people who have gotten to, say, Day 2 a regional with it. So that's why I think it's still very firmly Tier 2, but the numbers do put it at the bottom of Tier 2. Next, we're going to go into Tier 3. These are decks that have between 30 and 50th percentile in the rankings. Solid picks, thought through decks. A lot of these have managed to Day 2 regionals in the Brilliant Stars format, but either because of bad matchups, consistency issues, or any other reason, they're not quite in the upper half of our rankings here. And at the top of Tier 3, we have ARCEUS MALAMAR. This deck's had a lot of hype recently. Malamar VMAX has a ton of disruption options if you're able to get your opponent into a small hand size. Max Jammer makes them shuffle a card into their deck, which could be exactly what they need to get out of a very tough situation. Whereas you have so much consistency with ARCEUS and Bibarel that you're able to get the game flowing pretty well for yourself. Malamar's damage output is just like 20 damage too low. You find yourself just shy of KOs sometimes. You're still going to 2-shot everything in the format, but it can give you a couple of not so great turns if you don't get the right out so your opponent pops off. Afterward, we have INTELEON. Lots of spread here and lots of healing. This deck runs a bunch of Cheryls, so it's another one of those inconvenient decks to go up against if you aren't able to play the long game. A lot of these decks I haven't played much of myself. Again, I've only faced the INTELEON list myself. It does look very fun, but I can see why it's at Tier 3. Takes a horrendous Jolteon matchup, weak to Lightning. I was thinking maybe it might be inconsistent, but you have the INTELEON line, so that's probably not the biggest issue. Next, we have an Evolving Skies favorite, Umbreon Urshifu. Umbreon VMAX letting you gust up any Pokemon your opponent has, and then Single Strike Urshifu letting you take gigantic KOs on your opponent. It will hit all these dark decks for weakness, and the Umbreon can hit Mew for weakness. It has solid game plans against a lot of the big decks in format, but it also has big targets on its back. Any fighting type attacker that's let into a deck is going to have a hard time is going to give the Umbreon a hard time, I should say. And then Mew, Malamar, a lot of these psychic attackers are also going to give the Single Strike a hard time. So it's sort of a double-edged sword there. Weakness can sometimes be in your favor, but it can also really hurt you down the line. Next we have Dark ARCEUS. This one is forgoing the INTELEON line and running a bevy of Dark-type attackers. Galarian Moltres V, Galarian Moltres from Evolving Skies, the one prizer with the insane attack that does an extra 50 damage for every prize card your opponent has taken. However, it does not play the INTELEON engine, so it doesn't have that cherry pick of consistency that these other ARCEUS variants do have. Next, we have TOGEKISS. This one was a new one to me. It runs a 4-4 TOGEKISS line, and it has a lot of different supporters. This one can heal, it can play a control style game, but it's also weak to fighting, and it doesn't hit anything for weakness itself, so it can be a bit fragile if you're not able to really get advantage on your opponent. Next, we have LEAFEON INTELEON. This runs a combination of the LEAFEON VMAX and the LEAFEON V-Star, allowing you to give your opponent's Pokemon a very high retreat cost, stick something inconvenient in the active, and then chip away at them. Or using the V-Star's ability, you can get an extra gust on your turn, and then you do more damage for the increased retreat cost. Things like Galar Mine are going to help you. A bit of a gimmicky strategy, but it still managed to get some nice placements this past week. Then we have Dark Box INTELEON. So sort of like the Dark Box ARCEUS list, it's that other point of the triangle. This one is a mostly single prize deck, trying to capitalize on all the different weaknesses in the format. Mew, ARCEUS, and then those other dark type attackers, GENGAR for example. And it's mostly a single prize deck. It does sometimes run a Galarian Moltres V, a Galarian Zapdos V, just to hit more of those tech weaknesses. It plays the Galarian Weezing that can take away abilities, so you can put that up in front to stall for a couple turns. It plays Hoopa, which is great for getting rid of your opponent's Sobbles and Drizziles if they're playing one of those INTELEON decks. But sometimes it can be a little... I mean, even with the INTELEON engine, it can be a bit inconsistent since there are so many attackers you have to search for. And if your opponent just steamrolls you, there sometimes isn't much you can do about that. Sometimes you draw the attackers, the wrong attackers at the wrong time, and it can put you in a pretty inconvenient place for that game. Rounding out Tier 3 is Big Turna, the hand himself, Eternatus. If you're trying to hit Mew for weakness, if you're trying to just absolutely clobber some VMAXs, while also taking a lot of durability yourself, Eternatus can also help you out there. With 9 Pokemon, it will do 270. With a Choice Belt, you are doing a full 300. And then you have some other tech attackers like the Hoopa. Very aggressive deck. The only problem is that it is very weak against Path to the Peak or Collapse Stadium. Those do mess with the Eternal Zone ability. So some very common options in these popular and sometimes stronger decks can really put a wrench in its plan. Finally, we're getting to the Rogue section. These are decks that have not done as much as far as achievement, but have had a decent bit of popularity or maybe 1 or 2 decent placings in the week, and they seem pretty interesting. One of my favorite decks is Shadow Rider Calyrex. We have ARCEUS V-Star. I was very hype on this card when Chilling Reign came out. An ability that lets you attach extra energy and draw extra cards. Combined with Starbirth, this deck is going to be so consistent. It's ridiculous. However, once again, you got some pretty big weaknesses on your back. You've got the Dark weakness, and you've got the Fighting weakness, which everyone is teching against. And sadly, as time goes on, we're going to be getting that Darkrai V-Star. We just got Lucario V-Star. So things just get a little bit darker for this deck every day, which makes me very sad because, again, I thought Shadow Rider Calyrex was such a cool card, had my favorite parts of all my favorite cards combined, but, you know, sometimes that's just how things fall. Next, we have Dragapult INTELEON. This deck was doing amazing when we rotated a few months back. It's been able to get a couple results. Sometimes the 50 damage isn't quite enough. Sometimes your opponent's going to, once again, hit you with a giant dark type attacker. So, you know, it's not going to work out for you all the time. And then finally, we have Blastoise VMAX with ARCEUS. I'll be completely honest, I barely looked at the list for this one. But hey, we love Kanto Stars and our Charizard. So this is the tier list. These last two I have down here were for general ARCEUS variants and Whimsicott ARCEUS before I realized that the Whimsicott list we've seen was just a standard Whimsicott. So this is the current tier list for the past week. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think something is in the wrong place? Anything you have to say, any comments you have, any suggestions are always appreciated, as would be a like, a comment, or a subscribe if you enjoy the content. Thank you so much for watching. This is Sakura Kingdom, and I'll see you later.